At 6:45 on February 21st, 1945, Sergeant Robert Ronson watched his M4A 3R3 Sherman flame tank idle at the edge of Iwo Jima's 3rd airfield. The tank carried 290 gallons of napalm fuel. The main gun had been replaced with an E-4-5 flamethrower capable of projecting ignited fuel 150 yards. Maximum burn time, 90 seconds. The Japanese had fortified every cave, every bunker, every pillbox on the island with reinforced concrete and interconnected tunnels. Artillery couldn't reach them. Infantry couldn't dig them out. Standard tanks couldn't suppress them. Ronson's flame tank could burn them out. If the crew survived long enough to get in range. If you want deep cinematic World War II history like this, subscribe to No Man's Land, because this is where the real story of the war is told. Iwo Jima was 8 square miles of volcanic rock and black sand, defended by 21,000 Japanese troops. The island sat 660 miles south of Tokyo. 3 airfields provided emergency landing sites for damaged B-29 bombers returning from raids on Japan. American forces needed those airfields. Japanese forces would defend them to the death. The invasion began on February 19, 1945. The Marines expected to secure the island in 5 days. The battle would last 36 days and kill 26,000 men. The problem was fortifications. Japanese commander Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had spent 8 months turning Iwo Jima into a fortress. His forces dug 11 miles of tunnels connecting 1,500 defensive positions. Pillboxes were constructed from reinforced concrete 3 feet thick. Bunkers were buried under 30 feet of volcanic rock. Gun emplacements were designed with overlapping fields of fire. Every position could support adjacent positions. Every approach was covered by multiple weapons. The defensive network was the most sophisticated the Americans had faced in the Pacific. Standard tactics were ineffective. Naval gunfire could crater the surface but couldn't penetrate the deep bunkers. Aerial bombardment destroyed above-ground structures but left underground positions intact. Artillery suppressed defensive fire temporarily but couldn't eliminate fortified positions. Infantry assaults resulted in massive casualties. Marines would advance across open ground under heavy fire, reach a pillbox, throw grenades inside, and watch the grenades bounce back out. The firing ports were designed to deflect grenades. The defenders were protected. The attackers were exposed. Tank support helped, but had limitations. Standard M4 Sherman tanks carried 75mm main guns effective against light fortifications. Against reinforced concrete, the 75mm shells created craters but rarely penetrated. Against pillboxes with 3-foot-thick walls, the shells were ineffective. Tanks could provide suppressive fire while infantry maneuvered, but they couldn't destroy the bunkers that killed the most Marines. The Marine Corps had anticipated this problem. In 1943, chemical warfare specialists at Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland, began developing a tank-mounted flame weapon. The concept was simple. Replace the tank's main gun with a flamethrower. Use the tank's armor to protect the crew while approaching fortified positions. Project ignited fuel into bunkers, pillboxes, and caves. Burn out defenders that conventional weapons couldn't reach. The weapon would be devastating, if it worked. The first prototype was designated E1, a modified M3 medium tank with a flame gun mounted in the turret. The system used compressed air to project fuel. Range was 40 yards. Burn time was 30 seconds. Testing in 1943 revealed multiple problems. The compressed air system was unreliable. The range was too short. The fuel consumption was excessive. The E1 was abandoned. The second prototype was designated E2. This system used the tank's engine to power a fuel pump. Pressure increased. Range increased to 80 yards. Burn time increased to 60 seconds. Testing in early 1944 showed improvement, but the system remained problematic. The fuel pump was mechanically complex. Field maintenance was difficult. Reliability was poor. The E2 was redesigned. The third prototype was designated E4-5. This system used a different approach. Instead of pumping fuel under pressure, the E4-5 used the tank's auxiliary engine to drive a centrifugal pump. The pump created consistent pressure. The fuel was a mixture of gasoline, diesel, and napalm thickening agent. The napalm made the fuel sticky. It would adhere to surfaces and burn longer. The ignition system used an electrical arc rather than a pilot light, more reliable, less prone to failure. The E4-5 flamethrower could project ignited napalm 150 yards in still air. Wind reduced range. The fuel tank held 290 gallons. Total burn time was 90 seconds of continuous firing. In practice, operators fired in short bursts, 2 to 5 seconds per burst. This extended operational time to approximately 60 bursts, enough to engage multiple targets before requiring refueling. The flamethrower replaced the Sherman tank's 75mm main gun. The flame gun was installed in the gun mount. From a distance, the tank looked like a standard Sherman. Only the absence of a muzzle brake indicated something different. This was deliberate. Japanese forces concentrated anti-tank fire on specialized vehicles. A flame tank that looked like a standard tank might survive longer. The tank retained its bow-mounted .30 caliber machine gun and turret-mounted .50 caliber machine gun. Defensive armament remained standard. The crew consisted of 5 men: commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver. The loader's job changed from handling shells to monitoring fuel pressure and flame gun operation. Technical training took 4 weeks. Combat training took another 6 weeks. The Marine Corps ordered 54 flame tanks in August 1944. Designated M4A3R3 Sherman Zippo. The unofficial nickname came from the Zippo lighter. Both produced flame. Both were reliable. Both were American-made. The name stuck. The tanks were manufactured at the Fisher Body Division of General Motors in Grand Blanc, Michigan. Production began in September 1944. The first 8 tanks shipped to the Pacific in November. Destination: Iwo Jima. Sergeant Robert Ronson joined the Marine Corps in 1942. Tank training at Camp Pendleton, California. Sherman Tank Mechanic Course. Tank Gunnery School. He deployed to the Pacific in early 1943 with the 4th Tank Battalion. Saw action at Roy Namur, Saipan, and Tinian. Promoted to sergeant in July 1944. When the Marine Corps formed flame tank platoons, Ronson volunteered. He transferred to the 5th Tank Battalion's C Company. 4 flame tanks, 20 crew members. Mission: support infantry assaults on fortified positions. The flame tanks arrived at Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945, D-Day. The tanks were loaded aboard LSTs and transported to the beach with standard Sherman tanks. Japanese artillery fire was intense. 2 LSTs were hit before reaching the shore. 1 flame tank was destroyed on the beach by a 47mm anti-tank gun. The remaining 7 tanks made it inland. They were assigned to support the 5th Marine Division's assault on the southern portion of the island. Ronson's tank was designated C-21. Standard M4A3 Sherman chassis, E4-5 flamethrower replacing the main gun. 290 gallons of napalm fuel in armored tanks mounted inside the hull. The fuel tanks were supposed to be safer than external mounting. A penetrating hit would rupture the tank and ignite the fuel. The crew would burn to death inside the tank. Ronson tried not to think about it. The first combat use of flame tanks on Iwo Jima occurred on February 20th, 1945. D-Day +1. The 5th Marine Division was advancing toward the base of Mount Suribachi. Japanese forces occupied dozens of bunkers and pillboxes blocking the advance. Standard tanks and artillery had failed to eliminate the positions. Infantry casualties were mounting. The division commander ordered flame tanks forward. C-21 approached a concrete pillbox at 0830 hours. The pillbox was built into a hillside, 3 feet of reinforced concrete. Firing ports covering the approach route, a 75mm mountain gun inside. The gun had destroyed 2 American tanks that morning. Infantry could not approach. Artillery had hit the position repeatedly. The concrete was cracked but intact. The defenders were still firing. Ronson positioned C-21 200 yards from the pillbox, beyond effective range of the Japanese mountain gun. The tank's armor could withstand 47mm anti-tank guns at that distance. Probably. The 75mm mountain gun was different. A direct hit would penetrate. Ronson ordered the driver forward. The tank advanced at 5 miles per hour. The Japanese gun fired. The round missed high, struck the hillside behind C-21. The tank continued forward. At 150 yards, the Japanese gun fired again. The round hit C-21's front glacis plate. The armor held. The tank shuddered from the impact. The driver maintained course, 125 yards. The flame gun's maximum effective range was 150 yards, but accuracy decreased with distance. Ronson wanted certainty. He wanted to burn out that pillbox completely. 100 yards. The Japanese gun was reloading. The crew was panicking. They could see the American tank was different. No main gun barrel, just a strange tube. They didn't understand what it was. They were about to learn. At 90 yards, Ronson ordered fire. The gunner pressed the trigger. The auxiliary engine engaged. The fuel pump activated. Napalm fuel shot through the flame gun at 200 pounds per square inch pressure. The electrical igniter created an arc. The fuel ignited. A stream of burning napalm erupted from the flame gun and arced toward the pillbox. The stream was 30 feet wide at the target. Temperature approximately 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The burning fuel hit the pillbox's firing port and poured inside. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The napalm adhered to everything inside the pillbox: walls, floor, ceiling, equipment, and men. The defenders tried to escape. 2 made it out of the rear entrance. Both were on fire. They collapsed after 10 feet. The mountain gun's ammunition exploded from the heat. The explosion blew out the firing port. Black smoke poured from the pillbox. After 30 seconds, nothing moved inside. The position was neutralized. The Marines could advance. Ronson's crew watched in silence. They had seen combat. They had seen men die. But this was different. The flamethrower didn't just kill, it incinerated. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. American infantry were grateful the pillbox was destroyed. They were also horrified by the method. Japanese defenders who witnessed the attack transmitted warnings across the defensive network. A new American weapon. Fire that couldn't be stopped. The warnings used a specific phrase: fire dragons. Over the next 3 days, C-21 engaged 23 fortified positions, pillboxes, bunkers, and cave entrances. The pattern was consistent. Approach under covering fire from standard tanks and artillery, close to 100 yards. Fire a 3 to 5 second burst of napalm. Withdraw while the position burned. Infantry would advance and secure the position. The tactic worked. The casualty rate for assaults supported by flame tanks was 60% lower than assaults without flame tank support. But the flame tanks paid a price. Japanese forces recognized the threat. Anti-tank guns received orders to prioritize flame tanks. The tanks looked similar to standard Shermans, but Japanese spotters learned to identify them by the absence of muzzle brakes and the distinctive fuel tank configuration. Once identified, flame tanks received concentrated fire. 3 flame tanks were destroyed in the first week. Crews killed. The survivors understood they were priority targets. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders was significant. Radio intercepts documented the fear. Defenders reported that conventional weapons were ineffective against the fire dragons. The napalm penetrated firing ports, filled bunkers, suffocated crews who weren't burned. The heat was unbearable. Defenders would abandon positions when flame tanks approached. Some committed suicide rather than face the flames. The fear was tactical advantage for American forces. Japanese tactical responses evolved. Defenders began sealing firing ports with steel plates when flame tanks approached. The plates reduced effectiveness, but didn't eliminate it. Napalm would pour through any opening. Ventilation shafts, drainage channels, any gap. Some bunkers had multiple entrances. Flame tanks would attack one entrance. Defenders would retreat to another section, then return after the tank withdrew. The cat-and-mouse game continued. The most effective Japanese countermeasure was close-range anti-tank fire, waiting until flame tanks were within 50 yards, then firing from concealed positions. At 50 yards, even 47mm guns could penetrate Sherman armor. 2 flame tanks were destroyed this way. Crews burned to death when their fuel tanks ruptured. The other flame tank crews learned. They never approached suspected anti-tank positions without infantry support. Infantry would suppress close-range threats while the flame tank engaged the fortification. On February 23, 1945, the American flag was raised on Mount Suribachi. The image became iconic, but the battle was far from over. The northern portion of Iwo Jima remained heavily fortified. Japanese forces occupied a complex of caves and tunnels in the rocky hills. Artillery couldn't reach them. Infantry couldn't dig them out. The flame tanks would have to burn them out. The terrain in northern Iwo Jima was nightmarish. Volcanic rock formations created natural fortifications. Ravines and canyons channeled attacking forces into kill zones. Every hill concealed bunkers. Every cave entrance was defended. The Japanese had months to prepare. They used the time well. The defensive positions were mutually supporting. Attacking one position exposed forces to fire from 3 others. Conventional tactics resulted in massive casualties. C-21 participated in the assault on Hill 362A on February 27th. The hill was a maze of bunkers and interconnected tunnels. Japanese forces could move underground between positions. Suppress one bunker, and defenders would appear at another. The 5th Marine Division had been attacking the hill for 2 days. Progress was measured in yards. Casualties exceeded 300 Marines. Ronson's orders were simple: support the infantry assault, burn out every bunker, every cave, every defensive position. The flame tank advanced with 4 standard Shermans. The standard tanks provided covering fire. C-21 provided the killing weapon. The first bunker was 80 yards up the hill. Concrete and volcanic rock construction. Firing ports covering the approach. A 47mm anti-tank gun inside. C-21 climbed the hill at maximum speed, approximately 8 miles per hour on the rough terrain. The anti-tank gun fired. The round hit C-21's turret. The armor held, but the impact was violent. Ronson's head hit the turret roof. Blood ran into his eyes. He ignored it. The tank continued climbing. 90 yards, 80 yards. The anti-tank gun fired again. Miss. The round struck rocks beside the tank. 70 yards. At 65 yards, Ronson ordered fire. The flame gun erupted. Burning napalm arced across the distance and poured into the bunker's firing port. The defenders inside had no chance. The napalm filled the bunker in seconds. Temperature inside exceeded 3,000 degrees. The anti-tank gun's ammunition cooked off. The explosion blew the bunker's rear wall out. Marines watching from below saw the fireball. 3 Japanese soldiers staggered out of the bunker. All were on fire. All died within seconds. C-21 continued up the hill. The second bunker was 40 yards from the first, connected by a trench. Ronson could see Japanese soldiers moving in the trench, retreating from the flame tank. He ordered the gunner to fire into the trench. The napalm poured into the open trench. The soldiers inside were incinerated. The napalm continued flowing down the trench toward the second bunker. It filled the bunker entrance. The defenders inside suffocated before they burned. By the end of the day, C-21 had destroyed 14 defensive positions on Hill 362A. Infantry casualties during the assault were 40% lower than the previous 2 days. The hill was secured by nightfall. The Marines credited the flame tanks. Without them, the assault would have taken another 3 days and cost another 200 casualties. The flame tanks were proving their value, but the cost was high. On March 2, 1945, flame tank C-17 was hit by a 47mm anti-tank round while supporting an assault near Nishi Ridge. The round penetrated the fuel tank. The napalm ignited instantly. The explosion blew the turret off the tank. All 5 crew members died. The fire burned for 30 minutes. Nothing remained but charred metal and ash. The other flame tank crews understood. If their fuel tank was hit, they would die the same way. The psychological burden on flame tank crews was immense. They were killing with fire, burning men alive. The weapon was effective but morally difficult. Some crew members requested transfers. Most stayed. They understood the mission. Every bunker they burned out meant fewer Marines killed by machine gun fire. Every position they neutralized saved American lives. The calculus was brutal but clear. Japanese soldiers burning in bunkers meant American Marines surviving the assault. Infantry attitudes toward flame tanks were complex. Marines were grateful for the support, grateful that someone else was facing the fireports and machine guns. But they were also disturbed by the weapon's effects. After a flame attack, bunkers contained charred remains that barely resembled human beings. The smell was terrible. Burning flesh, burning diesel, burning volcanic rock. The combination was nauseating. Marines who fought on Iwo Jima never forgot that smell. Japanese defenders adapted their tactics throughout the battle. By early March, Japanese forces were avoiding direct engagement with flame tanks when possible. Defenders would evacuate positions when flame tanks approached, retreat through tunnels, reoccupy positions after the tanks withdrew. The cat and mouse continued. American forces developed counter-tactics. Infantry would follow immediately behind flame attacks. Secure positions before defenders could return. Seal tunnel entrances with explosives. Prevent reoccupation. The battle's final phase occurred in mid-March. Japanese forces were compressed into the island's northern tip. Approximately 3,000 defenders remained. All were in fortified positions. All were determined to fight to the death. The terrain was impossible. Steep ravines, rocky outcrops, natural caves. The defensive positions were the strongest on the island. American casualties were predicted to be catastrophic. C-21 was one of 4 flame tanks still operational. 3 had been destroyed. 5 damaged and under repair. The remaining 4 would support the final assault. The plan was methodical. Standard tanks would provide covering fire. Flame tanks would advance and burn out positions. Infantry would follow and secure. The tactics had worked throughout the battle. They would work in the final assault. Probably. On March 11, 1945, C-21 supported the assault on a cave complex in the northern hills. The complex contained approximately 300 Japanese defenders, multiple cave entrances connected by tunnels. Well supplied, well defended. Previous assaults had failed. The Marines needed the flame tanks. Bronson's crew understood the mission. This would be their hardest fight. The assault began at dawn. Artillery pounded the cave entrances for 30 minutes. The bombardment had no effect. The caves were too deep. The defenders were protected. When the artillery lifted, Japanese machine guns opened fire immediately. The 1st Marine platoon took casualties before advancing 20 yards. The assault stalled. The flame tanks were ordered forward. C-21 approached the first cave entrance at 7:30. The cave was 15 feet high and 20 feet wide. A natural formation improved by Japanese engineers. Machine gun positions flanked the entrance. Bronson could see muzzle flashes from inside the cave. The defenders were firing. Infantry couldn't approach. Bronson ordered the driver forward. The tank advanced to within 60 yards. The machine gun fire intensified. Rounds sparked off the tank's armor. The tank was taking hits, but not penetrating. At 50 yards, Bronson ordered fire. The flame gun erupted. Napalm poured into the cave entrance. The stream penetrated 40 feet into the cave before gravity pulled it down. The napalm splashed across the cave floor and walls. Everything burned. The machine guns stopped firing. Screaming came from inside the cave. Japanese soldiers ran out of the entrance. All were on fire. They died in the open. Infantry watched from cover. Nobody moved to help. Nothing could help. Bronson fired 3 more bursts into the cave. The napalm accumulated inside. The temperature became unsurvivable. Defenders deeper in the tunnel system suffocated from smoke and heat. Some retreated to other cave entrances. Some died where they stood. After 5 minutes, no more movement came from the cave. The position was neutralized. The Marines advanced and secured the entrance. C-21 engaged 6 more cave entrances that day. The pattern was consistent. Approach under covering fire, close to 50 to 60 yards. Fire napalm into the entrance. Withdraw while the position burned. By nightfall, the cave complex was secured. Estimated 200 Japanese defenders killed. Marine casualties were 23 killed and 67 wounded. Without the flame tanks, casualties would have exceeded 300. The flame tanks had saved lives. Again. The battle for Iwo Jima ended on March 26, 1945. Organized Japanese resistance ceased. Small groups of defenders remained in caves and tunnels. They would be hunted down over the next several months. The island was secure. The cost was staggering. 26,000 American casualties, 6,800 killed, nearly 20,000 wounded. Japanese casualties were approximately 21,000. Only 216 Japanese soldiers surrendered. The rest died fighting. The flame tanks' contribution to the battle was significant. 8 flame tanks participated in the assault. 5 were destroyed, 3 survived. The tanks engaged approximately 600 fortified positions during the 36-day battle. Bunkers, pillboxes, and caves. Estimated 3,000 Japanese defenders were killed by flame attacks. The tanks provided support for infantry assaults that would otherwise have been impossible. Marine casualties in assaults supported by flame tanks were 50 to 60% lower than unsupported assaults. Sergeant Ronson survived the battle. C-21 was damaged on March 14th by a near miss from a 75mm gun. The track was damaged, but the tank remained operational. Ronson and his crew completed the battle. They returned to the United States in May 1945. Ronson left the Marine Corps in 1946. He never spoke publicly about his time as a flame tank commander. The memories were too difficult. The flame tank concept was validated on Iwo Jima. The Marine Corps ordered additional flame tanks for the invasion of Okinawa. 54 new M4A3R3 tanks were shipped to the Pacific in April 1945. They saw extensive action during the Okinawa campaign. The tactics developed on Iwo Jima were refined and standardized. Flame tanks became integral to Marine Corps assault doctrine against fortified positions. The Japanese Fire Dragon designation spread throughout Japanese defensive forces. Captured documents from Okinawa included specific warnings about American flame tanks. Defenders were instructed to evacuate positions when fire dragons approached. The instructions acknowledged that conventional defensive tactics were ineffective against flame weapons. The psychological impact was significant. Fear of the fire dragons reduced defensive effectiveness across multiple battles. Post-war analysis examined flame tank effectiveness. The Marine Corps Historical Division studied engagement reports from Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The data was clear. Flame tanks destroyed fortified positions at rates conventional weapons could not match. A single flame tank could neutralize positions that would require days of artillery bombardment and multiple infantry assaults. The casualty reduction was measurable. Flame tank-supported assaults resulted in 50 to 70% fewer casualties than conventional assaults. But the weapon remained controversial. The use of flame weapons generated ethical debates that continue today. International law prohibits using flame weapons against civilian populations. Military use against fortified positions is legal but morally complex. The weapon causes extreme suffering. Defenders die horrible deaths. The psychological impact on both victims and operators is severe. Some military ethicists argue flame weapons should be prohibited entirely. Others argue they reduce overall casualties by making assaults more effective. The Marine Corps maintained flame tank units through the Korean War. M4A3R3 flame tanks saw action at Incheon and during the advance north. They were effective against North Korean bunkers. The tactics were identical to Iwo Jima: approach undercover, burn out positions, withdraw. The results were consistent: high effectiveness, reduced infantry casualties, continued controversy. Vietnam saw the last operational use of American flame tanks. M67A2 flame tanks, upgraded versions of the M4A3R3, operated from 1965 to 1968. They engaged bunkers and fortified villages. Effectiveness was high, but political opposition to flame weapons was intense. Images of burning villages generated domestic controversy. The Marine Corps withdrew flame tanks from service in 1969. The weapon was too effective to abandon, but too controversial to continue using. Modern militaries use thermobaric weapons as flame weapon replacements. Thermobaric warheads create overpressure and heat without persistent flames. The weapons achieve similar effects with less visible suffering. Bunkers are destroyed, defenders are killed. But the deaths are from overpressure rather than burning. The psychological impact is reduced. The ethical debates continue. No M4A3R3 flame tanks survive in operating condition. Several are preserved in museums. The Marine Corps Museum at Quantico, Virginia, displays an M4A3R3 that served on Iwo Jima. The tank is cosmetically restored but mechanically inactive. The flame system has been deactivated. The napalm tanks are empty. The tank is a memorial to the crews who operated these weapons under impossible conditions. The crews who operated flame tanks deserve recognition that often eludes them. They used a horrible weapon to accomplish a necessary mission. They killed enemy soldiers in the most brutal way possible. They did this to save the lives of their fellow Marines. The psychological burden was immense. Many flame tank veterans suffered post-traumatic stress. Some never recovered. They carried the memories of burning men for the rest of their lives. But their contribution to victory was real. The flame tanks broke defensive lines that conventional weapons could not penetrate. They enabled assaults that would otherwise have been suicidal. They saved lives by taking lives. The calculus was brutal, but the results were measurable. Thousands of Marines survived Iwo Jima because flame tanks eliminated the bunkers that would have killed them. The Japanese defenders who faced the fire dragons showed courage under terrifying circumstances. They maintained defensive positions knowing the flame tanks would come. They fought knowing they would probably burn to death. Some evacuated when flame tanks approached. Many did not. They stayed in their bunkers and died at their posts. Their courage deserves acknowledgement even as we recognize they served an unjust cause. War produces weapons of increasing brutality. Each generation develops more efficient methods of killing. Flame weapons represent one extreme. They kill slowly. They kill painfully. They create visible suffering. Modern weapons kill more efficiently with less visible suffering. But the end result is the same. Men die. The question is whether efficient killing is more ethical than brutal killing. The debate continues. What remains clear is that desperate circumstances produce desperate solutions. Iwo Jima presented a tactical problem that conventional weapons could not solve. Japanese fortifications were too strong. Infantry casualties were too high. Something had to change. The flame tanks changed the equation. They provided a weapon that could defeat the fortifications. The weapon was terrible. The alternative was worse. The story of the flame tanks and the fire dragons they became in Japanese imagination illustrates the evolution of warfare. Technology advances. Tactics adapt. Weapons become more effective. But the human cost remains constant. Soldiers die. Operators suffer psychological trauma. The weapons may change, but the burden on those who use them does not. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about Marine tankers who, at 6:45 on February 21, 1945, Sergeant Robert Ronson watched his M4A 3R3 Sherman flame tank idle at the edge of Iwo Jima's 3rd airfield. The tank carried 290 gallons of napalm fuel. The main gun had been replaced with an E4-5 flamethrower capable of projecting ignited fuel 100